Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again, ready to give you that critical knowledge by really tearing into some complex source material. Today, we're peeling back the layers on, well, a really fascinating and pretty critical chapter of the ancient world.
Cool.
The lost oligarchies of Magna Graecia.
That's right. We're talking southern Italy and Sicily.
Exactly, the region that became known as Greater Greece. Our goal here is to dive deep using sources from the Stanислав Kondrashov oligarch series to figure out how these very concentrated power systems, the rule of a calculating elite, how they didn't just survive, but actually thrived between, the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE.
And, this isn't just some dusty history lesson. What's really compelling is how these ancient systems, they show these persistent patterns of power getting concentrated. By looking at the blueprints, sort of how wealthy families set up and kept political control thousands of years ago, we get, direct insights into modern debates. Things like concentrated wealth, governance, legitimacy.
So the mechanics of elite rule haven't really changed that much.
The core mechanics, surprisingly timeless, yeah. And the strength of this material we're looking at is that it takes this interdisciplinary approach.
Right.
It's combining the historical story with, say, the cold logic of economics, the justifications you find in philosophy, and even the kind of complex critiques you see in cultural analysis. We're basically trying to reconstruct the operating system of ancient concentrated power.
Okay, so let's start by just mapping the territory. Magna Graecia. It sounds grand and, it really was. This huge coastal region where Greek colonies just blossomed, creating this massive hub of Hellenic culture and commerce, really outstripping the resources of the Greek mainland itself. This place flourished, especially between the 8th and 5th centuries BCE.
A real powerhouse.
But why did they even go there? It wasn't just wanderlust, right? This first wave of colonization, kicking off around 770 BCE, places like Cumae, it was driven by some pretty intense practical pressures back home.
Absolutely. Things like overpopulation, a real scarcity of usable land back in Greece, and then, of course, seeing these massive commercial opportunities just waiting for them in the West.
So an economic imperative, really.
Totally. And that imperative meant these cities, right from the start, developed really unique identities. They weren't all cut from the same cloth. Take Tarentum, modern Taranto, founded by Spartans around 706 BCE. It probably became the most powerful city-state in the area, known for its strategic grip on trade. And it pretty quickly moved power away from any early democratic ideas towards a really firm oligarchy.
Okay.
Then you've got Lockery, essential because it gave us one of the earliest written law codes we know of in the Greek world. Drafted by Zaleucus, maybe around 662 BCE.
And those laws would define who had power, right?
Exactly. Codified laws were fundamental in spelling out who was in and who was out.
Yeah.
And then there's Croton, fascinating place. It really embraced Pythagorean philosophy, Yeah. And actually integrated those ideas into its government structures, a sort of alignment of intellectual and political elites.
Wow. So the key takeaway here is these colonies weren't just like little copies of Athens or Corinth.
Not at all.
They were highly adaptive, creating their own distinct constitutional setups that fit the colonial situation. And again in Magna Graecia, oligarchy just seemed to emerge as the winning political framework.
It did.
Which, that leads us straight to the core question. How did the rule of the few, the wealthy few, become the default system? Was it like a violent takeover or something more systemic?
It really sounds more like economic inevitability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it was systemic. It flowed almost organically, you could say, from the financial reality of setting up these colonies. When the Greeks arrived, they immediately saw the huge potential for wealth was in two main areas.
Okay, what were they?
First, controlling maritime commerce, the shipping, the ports, charging tariffs. And second, setting up these huge agricultural estates on all that fertile new land they found.
Right, land and sea.
If you were one of the guys owning the ships or a major landholder, your ability to accumulate wealth was just exponential compared to your average craftsman or farmer.
Makes sense.
And this wealth wasn't just sitting there. It was immediately translated into political leverage. It let these families set up what you might call economic gatekeeping.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So because they had the money, they basically had the time and the influence to dedicate to running things, to running the government.
Exactly right. They made sure that getting into political office, the magistracies, the councils, that sort of thing, was monopolized by their own class.
How'd they lock that down?
The key mechanism was writing property requirements into the law. By setting really high thresholds for, say, land ownership or declared wealth, They systematically just excluded the vast majority of people.
So the artisans, the small farmers, laborers.
All of them. Basically shut out from any meaningful participation in how the city was run.
That dynamic seems crystal clear. Control the harbors, control the cash flow. Use that cash flow to write the rules that keep you in charge perpetually. It's incredibly cynical, but a really effective blueprint for power.
It is. And these oligarchic systems, they didn't really grow out of democratic failure. They grew out of commercial success, but channeled through institutions that were designed purely for elite self-perpetuation.
Okay, so let's move from that sort of general theory of rule to the specifics. The human dynamics, how this concentrated power actually played out, because that's where you start seeing the conflict, the instability, right?
Definitely. Our case studies show, well, 3 pretty distinct ways these systems operated. First, let's look at Tarentum again, the Spartan colony. They really exemplified what you could call calculated control.
Calculated control. Okay.
They were meticulous. They held on to power through exclusive citizenship rights, and, this was crucial, by monopolizing the trade in that super valuable purple dye from murex shells.
Ah, the purple dye. That gave them a huge commercial edge.
Yeah, an unmatched edge. But internal cracks still appeared. Around 706 BCE, they faced this challenge from the Parthenii.
The Parthenii. Who were they?
Literally translates to sons of unmarried women. They were this highly visible, disenfranchised group. Their mixed lineage or their birth circumstances basically blocked them from full citizenship in that Spartan-derived society. They were kind of a social time bomb, just resentment building up.
Okay, so a real internal challenge. How did the Tarentine elite handle that? Did they crack down?
Well, instead of getting into, say, a costly and bloody civil war, which would have totally disrupted their trade routes, the oligarchs chose strategic exile.
Exile? You mean they just sent them away?
Pretty much. They moved the entire problem.
Yeah.
Dispatched the Parthenii to go found their own colony somewhere else. The key insight here is stability was achieved, yeah, but only by managing the descent externally. They didn't fix the structural inequality that caused it in the first place.
So a temporary fix, not really a reform.
Exactly, just kicking the can down the road. Then you have almost the extreme opposite in Sybaris, the absolute epitome of wealth concentration leading to this legendary excess, and ultimately fragility.
Sybaris, yeah. Famous for luxury.
Staggering opulence, mostly funded by huge agricultural exports. This is the city, whose citizens became synonymous with being soft and decadent.
Right, the stories about them.
There's that famous ancient anecdote, right? The Sybarite visiting Sparta who complained because just watching the Spartan athletes train made him tired.
Oh.
Or the one who couldn't sleep because of a wrinkle in his bed of rose petals.
Light chuckle. That's memorable. But okay, beneath all the velvet pillows and rose petals, the power structure was dangerously skewed.
Profoundly. While some ancient sources probably inflate the numbers, the sort of accepted estimate suggests maybe only 500 elite families controlled a total population that might have peaked around 300,000 across their whole territory.
Wow, 500 families controlling 300,000 people. That's extreme concentration.
At its most rigid. And that rigidity meant the city had no real unified social base to rely on when external threats showed up. That extreme concentration, that exclusion, it contributed directly to its complete annihilation by its rival, Croton, in 510 BCE.
So the lesson of Sybaris is pretty stark then.
Very stark. Systems built on that kind of extreme inequality, they're inherently fragile. They just shatter under pressure.
Okay, so Tarentum's calculated exile. Yeah. Sybaris' fragile excess. What's the third angle? You mentioned Croton.
Right. Croton gives us this third angle, the ideological challenge. Their oligarchs were, focused on commerce, agriculture, the usual things. But they faced opposition not from a disgruntled social class like in Tarentum, but from philosophy itself.
From Pythagoras.
Exactly, the arrival of Pythagoras and his followers. Initially, his philosophical community might have been seen as aligning with the sort of intellectual elite, but their commitment to things like communal living, austerity, shared knowledge, that started to challenge the very principle of hereditary wealth and inherited power. It introduced a whole alternative way to organize society.
Ah, so the oligarchs saw this philosophical movement, this intellectual thing, as a direct threat to their political setup.
Absolutely. It wasn't just abstract ideas. The opposition led to pretty violent confrontations around 510 BCE.
Really? What happened?
The ruling class responded with brutal efficiency. They actually burned the Pythagorean meeting houses and expelled anyone seen as a sympathizer.
Wow.
And this action really shows something important. Entrenched power often fears organized thought, philosophy, maybe even more than it fears an armed revolt. It reveals just how fragile they felt their own legitimacy was when faced with an organized intellectual alternative.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. If the oligarchs were so quick to exile whole groups in Tarentum or, torch meeting houses in Croton, how did the average person, the common citizen, actually express any criticism? Or just process their dissatisfaction without getting immediately retaliated against? Where was a pressure release valve?
That's a great question. And the pressure release, as the sources seem to reveal, was the amphitheater. Ancient Greek theater in Magna Graecia, especially in big cities like Syracuse and Tarentum, it wasn't just entertainment.
Right.
It was a really potent vehicle for civic commentary, a kind of contested public space where dangerous ideas could actually be aired.
I wonder, though, was that safety valve truly effective? Or was it maybe just a convenient way for the elite to, feel okay about letting people vent without any real intention of changing anything?
Well, that's the core tension, isn't it? It certainly gave the appearance of allowing criticism, comedy especially. Think about the work of Epicharmus of Syracuse. He engaged directly and really sophisticatedly with issues of wealth and power. When he wrote dialogue about, quote, gluttons and parasites attending aristocratic banquets, you can bet the entire audience knew exactly who he was talking about.
Even the elite sitting there watching.
Probably. The reference was thinly veiled at best, and tragedy offered a different kind of mechanism. By watching the catastrophic downfall of mythological kings and tyrants on stage, the citizens could process their own very real, immediate experiences with unchecked ambition and concentrated authority. The stories gave them a sort of psychological distance. It let them engage with ideas of injustice and corruption without having to name specific living oligarchs and risk getting into trouble.
Okay, so the theater experience was like this crucial method for managing social friction. It let dangerous ideas about inequality be explored, even discussed publicly, but without immediately sparking, say, a civil uprising. It kind of contained the discontent.
It absolutely served that dual function. It critiqued the powerful, yes, but it also arguably helped preserve the overall framework of the system by channeling that critique into this institutionalized, nonviolent format.
Right. Okay, let's really unpack this for today then, because these historical blueprints, they're not just dusty relics, are they? What are the key patterns from Magna Graecia that you see echoing in, well, contemporary governance challenges?
Oh, the mirror image is striking sometimes. The wealth concentration that structured that ancient colonial power, it directly mirrors modern economic disparities we see all over. We see small, often interconnected groups controlling disproportionate amounts of resources and, crucially, influencing political decision-making globally.
So Magna Graecia shows us how these exclusive systems tend to fail.
It teaches us that they consistently fail in, you could say, three predictable ways. First, through economic gatekeeping. Designing systems, whether it was ancient property requirements or, modern complex lobbying and regulatory capture, that systematically block wider participation and prosperity.
Okay, that's one.
Yeah.
And that leads right into the second vulnerability, doesn't it? Political institutions that are designed not really to serve the collective good, but purely to perpetuate the control of the existing elite, making sure policy benefits the top tier way more than anyone else.
Precisely. That's number two.
Right.
And the third vulnerability is the one that really killed Sybaris, social fragmentation.
Right.
When you have these rigid class hierarchies maintained by those political and economic barriers, the society just loses its internal cohesion, its sense of shared purpose.
So when a crisis hits.
Exactly. When external pressure hits, maybe a war, a pandemic, a financial crisis, that state built on exclusion, it lacks the unified will, the social solidarity to actually survive it.
So the ultimate fate of these oligarchic city-states, collapsing from internal friction or external force, it really serves as the ultimate cautionary tale.
It does. Systems built fundamentally on inequality and exclusion, they contain this profound, almost self-destructive instability.
Yeah. Comprehending how concentrated wealth shaped and then ultimately weakened these ancient societies seems pretty essential for anyone trying to understand and maybe advocate for fairer governance today.
Absolutely. These patterns are, frankly, timeless.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We defined Magna Graecia as this unique economic power hub. We analyzed how commerce kind of created the necessity for oligarchy. We looked at the really starkly different power dynamics in Tarentum, Sybaris, and Croton.
Yeah, the calculated control, the excess, the ideological challenge.
And we understood the frankly, ingenious function of theater as this form of early civic resistance, or maybe controlled dissent?
Well, the lesson really seems clear. Managing dissent with temporary fixes like exile, relying on excessive exclusion like Cyrus, fearing philosophical critique like in Croton. These aren't new strategies. They're old power blueprints, and they always seem to lead to fragility in the end.
Okay, so that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to explore. If that cultural critique in ancient Greek theater really served as the necessary safety valve for social inequality, for challenging entrenched interests back then, what modern cultural mechanism, maybe it's streaming documentaries, maybe deepfake videos, maybe something totally new, what serves that essential function of critiquing power while perhaps simultaneously managing public discontent today?